The email came in at 2:14 a.m. Subject line: outstanding balance, $400,000. And when I opened the attachment, my parents had itemized my entire existence down to the last dollar. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old. 3 weeks ago, my parents sent me an invoice for raising me, and they didn't just send it to me. They CC'd my aunt, my uncle, and even my sister Ashley. Tuition: $148,000. Food and housing: $96,000. Miscellaneous expenses: $32,500. At the bottom in bold was a single sentence: we expect repayment within 12 months. I stared at the screen in my one-bedroom apartment in Chicago, the glow of my laptop reflecting off the kitchen counter I'd bought secondhand for $75, trying to understand how I had become a line item in my own family. Then my phone started buzzing. First my aunt: you should be grateful they kept records. Then my uncle: most kids cost more. Then Ashley, just one message: honestly, it's fair. I didn't reply to any of them. I just kept scrolling through the spreadsheet my father had built. Every row a memory turned into a debt. Age 7 piano lessons, $2,400. I quit after 3 months because he said I wasn't worth the investment. Age 14 braces, $5,800. I remember him telling the orthodontist, let's not go overboard. Age 18 college deposit, $15,000. That one had a note: non-refundable loss. I closed the file and sat there in silence because the worst part wasn't the number. It was how familiar it felt. Growing up, everything had a price in our house. Do you know how much your sneakers cost? Do you know what we sacrifice for you? Nothing is free, Emily. Ashley never heard those words. She got a brand new Honda Civic at 16 with a red bow on the hood. I got a lecture about gas mileage and a bus pass. She went to a private college out of state. I stayed in Illinois because it was more cost-effective. At family dinners, my dad would raise his glass and say things like, Ashley's going to be a real return on investment. Then he'd glance at me and add, we're still waiting to see about Emily. People would laugh. I learned to laugh too. That's the thing about being raised as a cost instead of a child. You start to believe it. You start to calculate your own worth in dollars and cents, measuring every decision against what it might cost someone else. By the time I graduated, I already had 2 part-time jobs and a spreadsheet of my own, tracking every expense so I wouldn't owe anyone anything. I thought if I paid my way, if I stayed small, if I didn't ask for more than I deserved, eventually they'd see me differently. I thought wrong. Because 3 weeks ago, when that email hit my inbox, it wasn't just a bill. It was proof that to them, I had never been their daughter. Just a long-term liability finally coming due. I should have been shocked. I should have been angry, but instead I did something else. I opened another file, one they didn't know existed. And as I stared at the numbers on my screen, I realized something for the first time in my life. They thought they were collecting a debt, but what they didn't know was that I had already decided how this would end. I opened the file at exactly 2:17 a.m., the same timestamp still blinking in the corner of my laptop screen. And for a moment I just stared at the numbers I had been building quietly for the past 3 years. It was not labeled anything dramatic. No clever name. Just personal ledger. Columns of dates, transactions, percentages, projections. Every dollar I had earned since I was 26, every expense cut, every opportunity one said no to because I had a different plan. While my parents were tracking what I owed them, I had been tracking something else entirely. Value. Growth. Leverage. I remember the exact moment it started. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 2 years after I graduated college, sitting at the same dining table where my father once slid a receipt toward me for a pair of shoes he said I had not earned. I had just gotten off a call with my manager, who told me I was being passed over for a promotion because I lacked executive presence. That was the phrase. Executive presence. I went home that night, opened my laptop and typed a question into the search bar. How to build assets with no support system. That search changed everything. I stopped thinking like someone trying to pay off a debt. I started thinking like someone building control. I picked up freelance work after my full-time job, analyzing small business expenses, optimizing budgets, anything that paid an extra $50, $100, $200. I stopped going out. I stopped upgrading anything. My phone was 3 generations old. My couch had a tear in the armrest I covered with a blanket. Every extra dollar went into something my parents would not understand. Not savings. Not exactly. Positioning. I learned how money moves when people are not paying attention. I learned how small percentages repeated over time become something else entirely. Something quiet. Something invisible. Something powerful. The first time I saw it working, I did not celebrate. I did not tell anyone. I just opened my spreadsheet and added another column. Projected outcomes. 6 months. 12 months. 18 months. I watched the numbers shift. Not dramatically. Not overnight. But steadily. Like something building under the surface where no one could see it. No one except one person. My grandmother, Eleanor Carter. She was the only one who ever asked me a different question. Not what does it cost? But what does it become? I used to visit her every Sunday afternoon at her small house outside Naperville, the same house she had lived in for 40 years. No designer furniture. No polished image. Just a quiet space filled with books, old photographs, and a kitchen table that had seen more real conversations than any room in my parents' house. One afternoon about a year ago, I showed her a piece of my spreadsheet. Just a small part. I expected confusion. Maybe even concern. Instead, she looked at the screen for a long moment, then leaned back in her chair and smiled in a way I had never seen before. Not proud. Not surprised. Certain. They are counting what they spent, she said softly. You are building what they cannot measure. I did not fully understand what she meant at the time. I thought she was just being kind. But then she reached into a drawer and pulled out a thin manila envelope, sliding it across the table toward me. Keep going, she said. And when the time comes, use this. I did not open it right away. I just took it home and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk, under a stack of old notebooks. I told myself it was not important, that I did not need help, that I could do this on my own. But I never threw it away. I never forgot it was there. And now, sitting in my apartment at 2:17 a.m., staring at my parents' invoice still open on one screen and my own ledger on the other, I finally understood what she meant. Because for the first time, the numbers on my side were no longer small. They were no longer something I had to protect or hide. They were something else entirely. Something that could answer a question my parents had been asking my entire life. And as my phone buzzed again with another missed call from my father, I realized something I had not allowed myself to admit before. I did not owe them anything. But what I was about to do next would make them wish I did. The envelope was still in the bottom drawer, exactly where I had left it, slightly bent at the corner like it had been waiting for me to notice it again, and I remember hesitating for a full 10 seconds before pulling it out because opening it felt like crossing a line I had spent years pretending did not exist. My phone buzzed again on the kitchen counter, another call from my father, then another from Ashley, their names lighting up the screen one after the other like a pattern I already understood too well. But I ignored both and focused on the envelope in my hands. It was lighter than I expected. Thinner. Not some dramatic stack of documents, not some obvious solution. Just a single folded sheet inside. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear the edge, and the first thing I saw was my grandmother's handwriting. Precise. Steady. Intentional. Not a long letter. Just a few lines. Emily, if you are reading this, it means they have finally shown you who they are. Do not argue. Do not explain. Let them measure everything. And when they do, give them exactly what they asked for, but on your terms. Underneath the note was something else. A document. Legal formatting. My name printed clearly at the top. I scanned the first paragraph once, then again, slower this time, feeling something shift in my chest as the words settled into place. It was not money. Not directly. It was control. Structured. Protected. Timed. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where I had spent the last 3 years building my own numbers, and placed the document next to my laptop, comparing what I had created with what she had prepared. For the first time, the two pieces connected. My work. Her foresight. My phone buzzed again. This time I picked it up. Not to answer. Just to read the message that came through. Ashley, you cannot ignore this forever. Dad is serious. I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed a response. Not emotional. Not defensive. Just one sentence. Tell him I am reviewing the invoice. I hit send and placed the phone face down on the table. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up my ledger again, scrolling past the early months when every number felt small, past the middle where things started to stabilize, to the most recent entries. The ones that mattered. The ones I had not shown anyone. Not even my grandmother. I started running the numbers again, this time not as projections but as decisions. If they wanted repayment, I would give them repayment. But not the way they expected. Not as a daughter trying to earn approval. As a transaction. Clean. Final. Measurable. I opened a new document and began outlining exactly what that would look like. Terms. Conditions. Structure. I did not rush. Every line had to be precise. Every number had to make sense. If they wanted to reduce our relationship to a financial exchange, then I would make sure it was one they could not control. One they could not rewrite. Outside the city was quiet. 3:08 a.m. according to the clock on my microwave. Inside, the only sound was the soft clicking of keys as I built something I knew would change everything. Not overnight. Not dramatically. But permanently. I stopped once halfway through and looked back at my grandmother's note. Give them exactly what they asked for, but on your terms. I repeated that line in my head, letting it settle, letting it replace every other voice I had grown up hearing. The ones that told me I was a cost, a burden, a bad investment. I finished the document just before 4 a.m., saved it, and attached it to a draft email addressed to both of my parents. I did not send it yet. Not immediately. I just stared at the screen, reading over every word one more time, making sure there was no emotion left in it. No room for interpretation. Just terms. Just structure. Just truth. Then my phone buzzed again, another incoming call from my father, and this time I let it ring all the way through without touching it, because for the first time in my life, I understood something clearly. They thought they were the ones setting the price. But what they did not realize was that I had already decided the cost. I hit send at 4:07 a.m., and for a few seconds nothing happened, just the quiet hum of my refrigerator and the faint glow of my laptop screen as the email disappeared into something I could not take back, and then I closed the computer not because I was unsure, but because I was done waiting. I went to bed without checking my phone again, which was something I had not done in years, and when I woke up at 7:42 a.m. there were 12 missed calls, 8 text messages and 1 voicemail, all from my parents. I did not listen to the voicemail right away. I sat at the edge of my bed, letting the morning light come through the blinds, letting the silence stretch just a little longer, because I already knew what had changed. They had read it. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Ashley. What did you send them? I read the message twice, then locked my screen and stood up, moving through my usual routine like nothing had happened, brushing my teeth, making coffee, pouring it into the same chipped mug I had been using for 5 years, the one with the faded blue stripe around the rim. I did not rush. I did not react. At 8:15 a.m. my phone rang again. Dad. I let it ring once. Twice. 3 times. Then I answered. Emily, he said immediately, no greeting, no pause, just my name tight and controlled. What is this? I took a sip of coffee before responding. It is a response, I said calmly. Silence. Not long. Just enough. This is not how this works, he continued, his voice sharper now. You do not get to dictate terms. I looked out the window at the street below, people walking to work, cars moving like nothing in the world had shifted, and I realized how small his voice sounded compared to everything else. You sent me an invoice, I said. I am responding to it. Another pause. Longer this time. This is inappropriate, he said finally. This is not what we discussed. We did not discuss anything, I replied. You sent a bill. The line went quiet again, and for a moment I thought he might hang up, but then I heard him exhale, slower this time, like he was recalculating. We are your parents, he said. This is not a business transaction. I almost smiled, but I kept my voice steady. It became one when you put a dollar amount on it. That was the moment something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but I could feel it. The control he had always assumed was no longer automatic. We need to talk about this in person, he said, the authority in his voice now mixed with something else I had never heard before. Uncertainty. I have outlined everything clearly, I said. You can review it. Emily, he said again, this time slower, like he was trying a different approach. This is not necessary. I did not respond right away. I let the silence sit between us, the same way it used to sit at the dinner table when I said something that did not fit the version of me they preferred. It is, I said finally. He did not argue immediately. Instead, he asked a question. Not aggressive. Not dismissive. Just direct. Where did this come from? I glanced at my laptop on the kitchen counter, still closed, the document inside it already doing its work. From the same place your invoice did, I said. Numbers. He did not respond to that. Instead, he changed direction again. Your mother is very upset, he said. She did not sleep last night. I closed my eyes for a second, not because I felt guilty, but because I recognized the pattern. Emotion as leverage. It had worked my entire life. You should have considered that. Before you sent the email, I said quietly. Another silence. He did not have a response ready for that one. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Less certain. We just want to resolve this, he said. I nodded, even though he could not see me. So do I replied. And for the first time, that was actually true. Not the way they meant it. Not through apology or negotiation or trying to earn back something that had never really been there. But through something else. Something final. I ended the call a few seconds later, not abruptly, not dramatically, just a clean end to a conversation that had already said everything it needed to say. And as I set my phone down on the counter, it buzzed again almost immediately, another call, then another, the screen lighting up over and over with their names, and this time I did not feel pressure or panic or the need to answer. I just watched it happen because for the first time in my life, they were the ones trying to reach me, and what they did not understand yet was that this was only the beginning. By noon the calls had stopped, and that was when I knew something had actually landed, because my parents were not the type to give up. They were the type to regroup, recalibrate, and come back with something more controlled, more strategic, something that looked reasonable on the surface but carried the same expectation underneath, and I had seen that pattern my entire life. At 12:03 p.m. my phone buzzed again, but this time it was not a call. It was an email. From my mother. Subject line: Let us talk calmly. I opened it at my desk during my lunch break, the same desk where I had spent years building reports for other people's businesses, optimizing margins, identifying inefficiencies, fixing systems that were quietly leaking money, and as I read her message I realized she was trying to do the same thing to me. Emily, it began. We think there has been a misunderstanding. The invoice was meant to start a conversation, not to create distance. I paused there, rereading that sentence, because it was almost impressive how quickly they had reframed it. Not a demand. Not a bill. A conversation. I kept reading. Your father and I have always wanted what is best for you. We sacrificed a great deal, and we believed it was important for you to understand that. However, the document you sent is extreme and unnecessary. We are family. We should not be turning this into something transactional. I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle, recognizing every technique. Soften the tone. Remove the edge. Reposition the intent. It would have worked before. It had worked before. But something was different now. Because this time I had already seen the original version. The invoice. The numbers. The bolded total at the bottom. You cannot undo that by calling it a misunderstanding. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Ashley, Mom is trying to fix this. Just meet them halfway. Halfway. I stared at that word longer than I expected to, because for years halfway had always meant the same thing. I adjust. I compromise. I reduce myself just enough to keep things smooth. I picked up my phone and typed a response. Not long. Not emotional. Just clear. I have already met them halfway. That is what the document is. I hit send and placed the phone back on my desk. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the file again, reading through each section slowly, making sure nothing had shifted overnight, making sure it still said exactly what I intended it to say. It did. Structured repayment, defined timeline, legal closure, and one line that mattered more than anything else. Upon completion of payment, all financial and personal obligations between parties are considered fully satisfied and permanently concluded. Clean. Final. No interpretation. No future claims. No emotional leverage disguised as responsibility. Around 1:30 p.m., my manager stopped by my desk to ask about a report, something about quarterly projections, and I answered like nothing else was happening because in a strange way nothing else was happening. This was not chaos. This was alignment. For the first time, the numbers matched the reality. At 2:07 p.m., my phone rang again. This time, I recognized the number immediately. It was not my father. Not my mother. It was a landline. Naperville area code. My chest tightened slightly as I answered. Hello. There was a small pause on the other end, then a familiar voice. Softer than I remembered. Slower. Emily, it is Grandma. I closed my eyes for a second, letting that settle, because I had not spoken to her in over a week, not since before everything shifted. Hi, I said quietly. I heard about the email, she said. Not accusing. Not surprised. Just stating a fact. They called me this morning. Of course they did. I glanced at the document still open on my screen, then back out the window, the city moving like nothing had changed. I figured they might, I replied. There was another pause, longer this time, and when she spoke again, her voice carried something different. Not concern. Not doubt. Recognition. You used it, she said. I looked down at my hands, resting still on the desk, and for the first time since I hit send, I felt the full weight of that decision. Not fear. Not regret. Just clarity. Yes, I said. She exhaled softly on the other end, almost like she had been waiting for that answer. Good, she said. And then, after a brief pause, she added something that made me sit up a little straighter in my chair. But Emily, they are not going to respond the way you expect. I frowned slightly, not because I doubted her, but because I had already mapped out every likely reaction, every angle, every possible move they could make. What do you mean? I asked. There was a quiet sound on the line, like she was shifting in her chair, choosing her words carefully. I mean, she said slowly, you think this is about money, but what they want is something else entirely. I did not respond right away. I just stared at the screen in front of me, the numbers, the structure, the control I had built so carefully, and for the first time since this started, I felt something unexpected slip in. Not doubt. Something more subtle. Question I had not considered. And what I did not realize then was that this conversation would change everything. The line stayed quiet after she said it, and for a moment I thought maybe I had misheard her, because everything I had done up to this point was built on one assumption, that this was about money, that if I could structure it correctly, quantify it, contain it, then I could finally close something that had been open my entire life, but now that assumption was starting to shift in a way I did not like. What do they want then? I asked, keeping my voice steady even though something underneath it had started to move. There was a soft sound on the other end, like she was adjusting her grip on the phone. Control, she said simply. I frowned slightly, my eyes drifting back to the document on my screen. Every line of it designed to remove exactly that. They already had control, I replied. That is what the invoice was. No, she said gently. The invoice was them losing it. I did not respond right away. I just let that sentence sit there because it did not fit into the structure I had built. Losing control did not look like sending a $400,000 bill in the middle of the night. It looked like silence, distance, withdrawal. But then I thought about the timing, the late hour, the public email, the way they copied other people into it. Not just a demand, a display, a way to pull me back into something I had been quietly stepping out of for years. They needed you to react, she continued, to argue, to explain, to come back into the conversation on their terms. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers resting lightly on the edge of my desk as I replayed the past 48 hours in my head. The calls, the messages, the shift in tone, the attempts to soften, to reframe, to pull me into a meeting, into a discussion, into something less defined than what I had sent. And my document? I asked. What does that do? There was a small pause, and when she answered, her voice carried something sharper now, something more certain. It takes away their ability to move the lines, she said. And they are not used to that. I nodded slowly, even though she could not see me, because that part made sense. Every interaction I had ever had with my parents was flexible, adjustable, based on how they felt in the moment. The rules shifted. The expectations changed. The definition of what I owed them was never fixed. Until now. So what happens next? I asked. This time the pause was longer. Not hesitation. Consideration. They will try something else, she said. Something that is not about numbers. I glanced at my phone on the desk, still silent for the moment, and felt that same subtle tension again. The one that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with anticipation. Like what? I asked. They will remind you who you are supposed to be, she said. Not who you have become. I exhaled slowly, my eyes closing for just a second as I recognized that pattern immediately. Not money. Identity. The version of me they had spent years reinforcing. The quiet one. The reasonable one. The one who did not push back too hard because it was easier to keep things smooth than to disrupt the system. And if I do not respond? I asked. Then they lose, she said simply. I opened my eyes and looked back at the document on my screen, at the structure I had built so carefully, and for the first time I understood something that had been sitting just outside my awareness this entire time. This was not about settling a debt. It was about ending a pattern. Completely. Permanently. Not through argument. Not through explanation. But through something they could not adjust or reinterpret. Emily, she said softly, pulling me back from my thoughts. You have already done the hardest part. I swallowed lightly, my grip tightening just a little on the edge of the desk. Which is? I asked. You did not react the way they expected, she said. I let that sink in because she was right. Every version of this in the past would have ended differently. With me explaining. Apologizing. Trying to make it make sense. Trying to prove something that was never actually being measured fairly. But this time I had not done any of that. Now you just have to hold the line, she added. I nodded again, slower this time, more deliberate, because I could feel exactly what she meant. Not doing more. Not adding more. Just not stepping back into something I had already stepped out of. Okay, I said quietly. I understand. We stayed on the line for a few seconds after that, neither of us speaking, just a shared silence that felt different from the ones I was used to. Not empty. Not tense. Just clear. Then we said goodbye, simple and calm. And I ended the call, placing my phone back on the desk. For a few minutes nothing happened. No calls. No messages. Just the steady rhythm of the office around me, people typing, phones ringing, the low hum of conversations that had nothing to do with me. And then at exactly 2:46 p.m., my phone lit up again. This time it was not my father. Not my mother. Not Ashley. It was a group chat I had not seen active in years. Carter family. And as the first message appeared on the screen, I felt something shift again, not in the situation but in the way it was about to escalate. Because what they did next was not private. It was not controlled. And it was exactly what my grandmother had warned me about. The notification did not just appear, it expanded across my screen like something deliberate, the old Carter family group chat lighting up for the first time in over 2 years. And I knew before I even opened it that this was no longer a private conversation, this was a stage. The first message was from my mother. Since Emily has decided to make this a legal matter, we feel it is important that the family understands the full situation. I stared at the screen for a second, then tapped into the chat, watching as the messages continued to stack one after another. My father followed immediately. We have always supported Emily to the best of our ability. We sacrifice financially and emotionally to give her opportunities. Recently, she has responded by sending us a document that attempts to sever all responsibility in exchange for a structured payout. The words were clean, controlled, framed, not angry, not aggressive, just positioned in a way that made them look reasonable. That was always their strength. Not what they said but how they said it. Within seconds the replies started coming in. Aunt Linda. I am shocked this is happening. Uncle Mark. Family should not be treated like a contract. A cousin I had not spoken to in years. There has to be more to this. I read each message slowly, not reacting, just observing how quickly the narrative was forming without me saying a single word. Ashley joined next. I have tried to stay out of this, but I think Emily is taking things too far. Mom and Dad never asked for anything unreasonable. I almost laughed at that, but I kept my face still, my phone resting in my hand as the conversation continued without me. Because this was exactly what my grandmother had warned me about. Not money. Identity. Positioning. They were not trying to collect $400,000 anymore. They were trying to define who I was in front of everyone else. The ungrateful one. The unreasonable one. The one who turned family into a transaction. I scrolled back to my father's message and read it again, this time more carefully, noticing what was not there. No mention of the invoice being sent at 2:14 in the morning. No mention of the itemized list. No mention of the total in bold at the bottom. They had removed the origin and replaced it with a reaction. Clean, effective, and familiar. My phone buzzed again. A direct message from Ashley this time. Say something. You are making this worse. I stared at her message for a moment, then looked back at the group chat, where the conversation was still building, more relatives adding their opinions, their assumptions, their quiet judgments based on a version of the story that had been carefully edited. I placed my phone on the desk and leaned back in my chair, letting the noise continue without me, because for the first time, I understood something I had never fully seen before. Silence was not weakness. It was leverage. If I responded emotionally, I would step back into the pattern. Defend. Explain. Justify. That was the role they expected. That was the version of me they knew how to manage. But if I did not respond, if I let the narrative sit incomplete, something else would happen. Gaps would form. Questions would surface. And the structure they were building would not hold as cleanly as they expected. The messages kept coming. Aunt Linda again. Emily, we would like to hear your side. Uncle Mark. There are always two perspectives. I picked up my phone again, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, not because I felt pressure to answer, but because I was deciding how. Not whether. How. I opened my email instead of the chat, pulling up the original message my parents had sent me. The invoice still attached, untouched, unchanged, exactly as it had arrived in my inbox. Then I opened the group chat again and looked at the conversation one more time, the way they had framed everything, the way they had positioned themselves, the way they had left out the one thing that would change how every single person in that chat understood the situation. I did not rush. I did not react. I selected the file, attached it, and then I typed one sentence. Not long, not emotional, just precise. For context, this is what started the conversation. I stared at the message for a second, then hit send. For a moment nothing happened. Just the faint reflection of my screen in the glass window beside me, the city still moving outside like nothing had changed. And then one by one the typing indicators appeared. 3 dots. Then another. Then another. The chat that had been so certain just seconds ago began to slow, hesitate, recalibrate in real time. Because what they did not expect was not my response. It was the evidence. The first reply did not come from my parents, and that was the first sign something had shifted, because usually they controlled the timing, the tone, the direction of every conversation, but this time the silence broke somewhere else. Aunt Linda. Wait, they sent you this? I watched the message appear, followed by the typing dots blinking on and off like hesitation made visible. Then Uncle Mark. Is this real? Another pause. Then a longer one. The kind that does not happen when people are confident. The chat, which had been moving quickly just seconds ago, slowed down in a way that felt almost physical, like something heavy had been dropped into the middle of it, and no one knew how to step around it yet. My phone buzzed again. Ashley, direct message. Why would you send that? I read it once, then set the phone down without replying because the answer was already in the chat, unfolding in real time. My father responded next. This was taken out of context. Short. Controlled. But not as steady as before. That was new. My mother followed almost immediately. We never intended for this to be interpreted this way. Interpreted. I noticed the word immediately because it was the same pattern again, not denying the document, not denying the numbers, just reframing the meaning. But it was too late for that. The file was there. The timestamp. The itemized list. The total at the bottom. No interpretation required. Another message appeared. This time from a cousin I barely spoke to. It literally says, "We expect repayment within 12 months. How else would you interpret that? I leaned back in my chair, letting the conversation continue without me, my hands resting still as the narrative shifted on its own, Without my help, without my explanation, just from the presence of something they had not expected to be seen. My father replied again, longer this time. We were trying to teach responsibility. Emily has always struggled with understanding the value of what she has been given. I read that slowly, feeling something old try to surface, something familiar, that instinct to correct, to defend, to explain that I had worked 2 jobs, that I had tracked every dollar, that I had built something from nothing without asking them for anything. But I did not type. I did not respond, because this was not about proving anything anymore. It was about letting the contrast exist on its own. Another message appeared. Aunt Linda again. She sent a structured agreement in response. That seems responsible. There was a pause after that. A longer one. The kind that stretches because no one has a clean answer ready. Ashley jumped in next. That document is extreme. It basically cuts them off. I watched that message sit there for a second before the replies started again. Uncle Mark. Or it defines boundaries. Someone else. Honestly, I can see both sides. The certainty that had filled the chat earlier was gone now. Replaced with something uneven. Something less controlled. Not support. Not opposition. Just doubt. And doubt was something my parents had never allowed space for before. My phone buzzed again. My father. Calling. I looked at the screen, his name lighting up again, and for a moment I just watched it ring the same way I had earlier, but this time it felt different because now the conversation was not just between us. It was visible. Shared. No longer contained in private calls or quiet corrections at the dinner table. When the call ended, a message came through immediately after. Emily, call me now. I did not. Instead, I looked back at the group chat where the messages had slowed to a near stop, people reading, processing, adjusting to a version of the situation that did not match what they had been told just minutes earlier. And then after a long pause, a new message appeared. Not from my parents. Not from Ashley. From my grandmother. I think we should all take a moment before deciding who is being unreasonable here. I stared at that line, simple, calm, but placed exactly where it needed to be. And for the first time since this started, I felt something settle completely into place. Not tension. Not anticipation. Just clarity. Because what they had tried to control was now something they could not fully contain. And what they did not realize yet was that this was not the turning point. It was just the moment everything became visible. No one replied to my grandmother's message for almost a full minute, and that silence said more than anything anyone had written so far, because for the first time since the conversation started, there was no clear direction, no easy side to take, just a pause where people were forced to actually think instead of react. Then slowly the messages started again. Not fast. Not confident. Careful. Aunt Linda. I agree. This feels more complicated than we thought, Uncle Mark. Maybe we should not jump to conclusions. The tone had shifted completely. Not support. Not defense. Just uncertainty. And uncertainty was something my parents had never been able to control. My phone buzzed again. Another call from my father. Then another. Then a message. Emily, this needs to stop. You are making this worse. I read it, then placed my phone face down on the desk because for the first time, I understood what worse actually meant to him. Not conflict. Exposure. I looked back at the group chat where the conversation was now moving slower, more deliberate, people asking questions instead of making statements, and I realized something that had never been possible before. The version of me they had always presented, the quiet one, the one who did not quite measure up, the one who needed guidance, that version was no longer the only one in the room. Now there was evidence. Context. Something they could not edit in real time. Ashley typed next. This is getting out of hand. We should take this offline. I almost smiled at that because that was the next move. Always. Move it back to private. Back to where things could be controlled, adjusted, softened. But the chat did not immediately follow her lead. Instead, someone else responded. My cousin Daniel. Why? It is already out here. Simple. Direct. And impossible to redirect cleanly. My father tried again. Family matters should stay within the family. This level of exposure is unnecessary. I read that twice, noticing how carefully it was phrased, how it avoided acknowledging that he had been the one to bring the situation into a group setting first, how it positioned the problem as visibility instead of action. My grandmother replied next. Then perhaps we should have started there. No accusation. No escalation. Just a quiet line that shifted the weight back to where it belonged. The chat went quiet again after that, longer this time, and I could almost feel the recalculation happening on the other side, the realization that the usual strategies were not working the way they always had. My phone buzzed again. Ashley, please just call them. This is embarrassing. I stared at that message for a second because that word embarrassing was something I had heard my entire life, usually directed at me, usually tied to something small, something I had said or done that did not align with the image they wanted to present. But this time it felt different. This time it was not about me. It was about them. I did not respond. Instead, I opened my laptop again and pulled up the document I had sent, reading through it one more time, not because I needed to check anything, but because I wanted to anchor myself in something that was clear, something that did not shift based on tone or pressure or perception. The terms were still there. Defined. Final. Unambiguous. My phone buzzed again. A new message in the group chat. My mother. Emily, if you feel hurt, we can talk about that privately. There is no need to escalate this further. I read it slowly, recognizing the shift immediately. Not denial. Not defense. Redirection. Emotion instead of structure. Conversation instead of agreement. A way to pull me out of the framework I had built and back into something they could manage. I did not type right away. I let the message sit there, visible to everyone the same way everything else had been visible, and I thought about what my grandmother had said. Hold the line. Not argue. Not explain. Just not step back. So I typed one sentence. I am not escalating anything. I am responding to what was already done. I hit send and placed my phone down again, my hand steady, my mind clear, because for the first time I was not reacting to the situation. I was defining it. And what they still did not understand was that this was not about winning an argument. It was about ending something that had been quietly shaping every interaction for years. The chat did not respond immediately after that. No typing dots. No quick replies. Just a stillness that felt heavier than before, because now there was nothing left to reframe. And as I sat there watching the screen without touching it, I realized something I had not allowed myself to fully accept until now. This was no longer reversible. And what they would do next would not be about controlling the narrative. It would be about trying to regain something they had already lost. The silence in the group chat did not break for almost 3 full minutes, and that was when I realized something had shifted beyond repair, because in my family, silence was never neutral, it was always a sign that something had gone off script. Then, finally, my father typed again. Not in the group chat. Direct message. Emily. Enough. Just one word after my name, but it carried more weight than anything he had said so far, because it was not an argument. It was an attempt to reassert something that was no longer automatic. I read it once, then locked my phone without responding, because there was nothing left to negotiate. A few seconds later, the group chat lit up again. My mother. We are stepping away from this conversation for now. We will address this privately. I watched the message appear, then settle, and for a moment I thought that might actually be the end of it, that they would pull back, regroup, try to contain what had already started to spread. But then something unexpected happened. Aunt Linda replied. Before we do that, I think it is important to acknowledge what was sent. That sentence landed differently. Not emotional. Not accusatory. Just grounded. Uncle Mark followed. Agreed. The original email matters. I sat still, my phone resting lightly in my hand, because this was not something I had planned for. Not support. Not confrontation. Just recognition. And recognition was something my parents had always controlled carefully, deciding what was seen, what was ignored, what was reframed into something more acceptable. But now they were not the only ones defining the situation anymore. My father did not respond to those messages. Not immediately. Not at all. Instead, my phone buzzed again. Another call. Then another. Then a voicemail notification. I did not listen to it. I did not need to. I already knew the tone. Controlled urgency. Frustration wrapped in authority. The same pattern, just under pressure now. The group chat stayed active but slower, more cautious, like everyone was aware that something important had been exposed, and no one wanted to step too far in either direction. Ashley typed again. Can we please stop doing this here? But this time no one responded to her right away. The urgency she was trying to create did not land the same way it had before. Because the context had changed. I placed my phone on the desk and stood up, walking to the window, looking down at the street below. People moving through their day without knowing that something fundamental in my life had just shifted in a way that could not be undone. For years, everything between me and my parents had existed. In a closed system. Private conversations. Controlled narratives. Quiet corrections. Now that system had been opened even just a little, and that was enough. Because once something is visible, it cannot be made invisible again. My phone buzzed again behind me. I did not turn around immediately. I just stood there for a second longer, letting the feeling settle, because it was not adrenaline, not relief, not even satisfaction. It was something steadier. Something quieter. Control. Not over them. Over myself. Over how I responded. Over what I allowed to continue. I walked back to my desk and picked up my phone. A new message. Not in the group chat. Not from my parents. From my grandmother. Come by tonight if you can. I read it twice, then glanced at the time. 4:12 p.m. The workday was almost over. The city outside was starting to shift into evening. I typed a quick response. I will be there. I did not ask why. I did not need to. Because if there was one thing I had learned over the past 48 hours, it was that the real turning points were not always loud. Sometimes they were quiet invitations that came at exactly the right moment. As I grabbed my bag and shut down my computer, my phone buzzed one more time. A new message in the group chat. My father. Short. Direct. This conversation is over. I stared at the screen for a second, then locked my phone and slipped it into my pocket, because for the first time, I understood something he did not. He could say it was over. He could try to close it. But what had already been revealed was not something he could take back. And what he did not realize yet was that tonight would not be about continuing the argument. It would be about ending something much bigger. I pulled into my grandmother's driveway at 6:18 p.m., the sky just starting to dim into that soft gray blue that always made her house feel quieter than the rest of the world, and for a moment I sat in my car with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, because I could feel it before I even walked in. Something was about to shift again, not in the loud, chaotic way the last 48 hours had unfolded, but in a way that felt more final. The front door was already unlocked like it always was, and when I stepped inside, the house smelled the same as it had for years, lavender and something warm from the kitchen, something familiar that did not need to be explained. Emily? Her voice came from the living room. In here. I walked in and found her sitting in her usual chair by the window, a small lamp on beside her, casting that soft yellow light that made everything feel steady, grounded, like time moved differently in this space. She looked up at me and smiled, not surprised, not concerned, just present. You came, she said. I nodded, setting my bag down by the door. You asked me to. She studied me for a second, not in a way that felt invasive, just attentive, like she was reading something I had not said out loud yet. Sit, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. I did. For a moment, neither of us spoke, just the quiet hum of the house around us, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, the kind of silence that did not need to be filled immediately. Then she reached over to the side table and picked up a folder, thinner than I expected, but deliberate in the way she held it. They came by earlier, she said. I felt something tighten slightly in my chest. Both of them? I asked. She nodded. Your father did most of the talking. That did not surprise me. What did he say? I asked. She let out a small breath, not tired, just measured. He said you were overreacting. That you misunderstood their intentions. That you were turning something simple into something unnecessary. I almost smiled at that because it was exactly what I expected, the same pattern just delivered in a different setting. And you? I asked. She tilted her head slightly, her expression unchanged. I asked him one question. I leaned forward just a little. What question? She held my gaze for a second before answering. I asked him why he sent it. I did not speak. I just waited. He said it was to teach you responsibility, she continued. So I asked him if that is something you had ever failed to demonstrate. I felt something shift at that, something subtle but real. What did he say? I asked. She gave a small, almost knowing smile. He did not answer directly. Of course he did not. She placed the folder on the table between us, her hand resting lightly on top of it. Emily, she said, her voice steady, what you did yesterday changed the structure. I looked down at the folder, then back at her. That was the point, I said quietly. She nodded once. Yes. But structures do not collapse immediately. They resist. They adjust. They try to pull things back into place. I thought about the group chat, the messages, the calls, the attempts to redirect, to reframe, to close the conversation before it settled into something they could not control. I know, I said. She slid the folder toward me slightly, just enough for me to take it. Then you need to understand what comes next. I hesitated for just a second before opening it, my fingers careful, deliberate, the same way they had been earlier with the envelope, and inside was a single document different from the one she had given me before, but connected in a way I could not fully see yet. I scanned the first few lines, my name appearing again, the formatting familiar, but the content different. Broader. Final. My eyes moved across the page once, then again, slower this time as the meaning settled in. Grandma, I said, my voice quieter now. She did not interrupt. She just watched me read, her expression calm, certain. When I finally looked up, something in my chest had shifted again. Not uncertainty, not fear, just a deeper understanding of what this had always been building toward. This is... I started then stopped because I did not need to finish the sentence. She nodded anyway. It is the last step, she said simply. I looked back down at the document, then back at her. They do not know about this, I said. It was not a question. No, she replied. And they are not expecting it. I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening slightly on the edge of the folder, because I could see it now, not just the immediate situation, not just the invoice, not just the conversation, but the entire pattern, the entire structure that had been built over years, and how this would end it completely. Emily, she said softly, once you do this, there is no going back. I met her gaze, steady, clear, because for the first time that did not feel like a warning. It felt like confirmation. I know, I said. And what I did not realize then was that the decision I was about to make would not just change how they saw me. It would change what they could ever ask of me again. I did not speak right away after reading it, because there was nothing immediate to say, no reaction that would match the weight of what I was holding in my hands, just a quiet understanding settling into place, deeper than anything that had happened in the last 2 days, something that made everything before it feel like preparation. I read the document again, slower this time, line by line, not because I did not understand it, but because I wanted to feel exactly where the shift happened, where the structure I had built intersected with what she had prepared long before I even realized I would need it. It was not complicated. That was what made it powerful. It did not rely on emotion. It did not leave space for interpretation. It defined ownership, control, finality, and most importantly, it removed something that had always been assumed. Access. I looked up at her, the folder still open in my hands. You planned this, I said quietly. She did not deny it. She did not soften it. She just nodded once. I prepared for it, she corrected gently. I exhaled slowly, leaning back slightly in the chair, because I could see it now, not just the past 2 days, not just the invoice, not just the conversation, but the years behind it, the patterns, the way everything had always been structured in a way that kept me inside a system I never agreed to but was expected to maintain. They are going to fight this, I said. It was not fear, just fact. She gave a small knowing smile. Of course they are, she said. That is what people do when something they have relied on is taken away. I looked back down at the document, my thumb resting lightly against the edge of the paper, tracing the boundary of something that felt more real than anything I had built on my own. And this ends it? I asked. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but precise. It does not end what they feel, she said. It ends what they can do. I let that settle because that distinction mattered more than anything else. Feelings could continue. Opinions could remain. But the structure, the expectation, the constant underlying assumption that I was something they could define, adjust, or claim, that would be gone. Once you sign this and file it, she continued, there is no pathway back into the old pattern. Not for them. Not for you. I nodded slowly because that was the point, but hearing it said out loud made it more real in a way that could not be undone. And the agreement I sent them? I asked. She glanced at the folder, then back at me. That was your boundary, she said. This is your exit. I felt something shift at that, something quiet but final, like a door I had not even realized I was standing in front of had just become visible. Not forced. Not rushed. Just there, waiting for me to decide whether to walk through it. My phone buzzed on the table between us, breaking the silence just slightly, and I glanced down at the screen. My father. Calling again. Then another message appeared beneath it. We need to resolve this now. I stared at the words for a second, then looked back at the document in my hands, the contrast between the two so clear it almost felt unreal. Urgency versus structure. Pressure versus decision. They are going to keep pushing, I said quietly. Until you stop responding the way they expect, she replied. I nodded, my grip on the folder steady now, not hesitant, not uncertain, just aware. If I do this, I said, they lose access completely. Yes, she said. To your time. To your decisions. To your finances. To the version of you they have been holding on to. I swallowed lightly, not because I doubted it, but because I understood the weight of that fully now, not just as a concept, but as something that would change every interaction from this point forward. And they will not accept that easily, I added. She shook her head slightly. No, she said. But acceptance is not required. I let that sit for a moment because that was something I had never fully allowed myself to believe before. That their acceptance was not a condition for my decisions. That I did not need agreement to move forward. My phone buzzed again. Another message. This time from Ashley. Please just come home and talk to them. This is going too far. I looked at the message, then set the phone aside without answering, because for the first time, I could see exactly what too far meant. Not unreasonable. Just outside their control. I closed the folder slowly, placing it on the table in front of me, my hand resting on top of it for just a second longer than necessary, grounding myself in the decision I already knew I was going to make. Then I looked up at her. What do I need to do? I asked. She smiled slightly, not proud, not relieved, just certain. You already know, she said. And in that moment I did, because this was never about finding the right answer. It was about finally allowing myself to act on it. And what I did not realize then was that the next 24 hours would not just close this situation. They would redefine every boundary I had ever been expected to accept. I signed it at 9:12 a.m. the next morning, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier, the document laid out in front of me, every line already memorized, every implication already understood, and for a moment just before I put pen to paper I paused, not because I was unsure, but because I was aware that this was the exact point where everything stopped being reversible. My phone had been buzzing since 7 a.m. calls. Messages. Voicemails I had not listened to. My father. My mother. Ashley. Even a number I did not recognize, probably someone they had pulled into the situation overnight. I ignored all of it, because none of those messages changed what was in front of me. I signed my name once, then again where it was required, the ink settling into the paper with a finality that felt quieter than I expected. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just clear. Then I scanned it, uploaded it, and sent it to the attorney listed at the bottom of the document, the same one my grandmother had trusted years before I understood why. The confirmation email came back at 9:27 a.m. Received. Processing. That was it. No ceremony. No announcement. Just a system acknowledging a decision that would reshape everything moving forward. My phone rang again at 9:31 a.m. My father. I looked at the screen for a second, then answered. Emily, he said immediately, his voice sharper than before, urgency no longer controlled. What did you do? I leaned back in my chair, my eyes drifting to the window, the same street, the same movement, everything outside continuing exactly as it always had. I finalized it, I said. Silence. Not confusion. Not hesitation. Just a pause where the meaning landed. You cannot do that without discussing it with us, he said, the authority in his voice trying to reassert itself, but thinner now, less certain. I already did, I replied. Another silence. Longer this time. This is not how family works, he said finally. I almost smiled, but I kept my tone steady. You made it a transaction, I said. I closed it. There was a shift on the other end, something I had never heard before, not anger, not control, something closer to realization. Emily, he said again, slower now. This is extreme. I did not respond right away. I let the word sit there the same way I had let every other label sit over the years, until it no longer carried the same weight. No, I said quietly. It is defined. He exhaled sharply, and for a moment I thought he might argue again, push harder, escalate the way he always had when something did not go his way. But he did not. Instead, he asked a different question. What do you expect to happen now? I looked down at the empty space on the table where the document had been just minutes earlier, then back out the window. Nothing, I said. That is the point. The silence that followed was different from the others. Not tactical. Not controlled. Just empty. Because for the first time there was nothing left for him to adjust, nothing left to reinterpret, nothing left to negotiate. We are still your parents, he said finally, quieter now. I nodded slightly, even though he could not see me. That has not changed, I replied. But what you can ask of me has. He did not respond to that. Not immediately. And when he spoke again, his voice had shifted in a way I had never heard before. Not authority. Not certainty. Something closer to distance. We will talk later, he said. I did not agree. I did not disagree. I just said, okay, and ended the call. My phone stayed in my hand for a second longer, the screen still lit. Then I set it down on the table and let the silence settle around me. Not heavy, not tense, just open. Around 10:15 a.m. my phone buzzed again. A new message. Not from my father. Not from my mother. From Ashley. They are not calling anymore. I read it once, then locked the screen because I already knew why. Not because they had accepted it. Not because they agreed. But because there was nothing left to push against. No open conversation. No undefined space. Just terms that did not move. Boundaries that did not adjust. And for the first time in my life, the absence of their voices did not feel like loss. It felt like something else entirely. Space. Real, uninterrupted, unclaimed space. I sat there for a few minutes longer, finishing my coffee even though it had gone cold, letting the quiet stretch without trying to fill it, because I understood something now that I had never fully allowed myself to see before. I was never a cost. I was never an investment. I was never something to be measured or repaid. And what they did not know, what they may never fully understand, was that the moment they put a price on me was the moment they lost any claim to define what I was